Welcome back. We're just so glad you could join us today.
Yeah, really glad to be here with you.
Because, well, when you think of a thrilling edge-of-your-seat read, a massive data-heavy Wikipedia table probably isn't the first thing that jumps to mind, right?
No, definitely not. Usually people run the other way.
Exactly. But for you, our favorite learner, we've got something special today.
We really do.
We're looking at a document that, on the surface, is just rows and columns. It's the complete list of United States senators from New York.
And it goes all the way back.
All the way back to the very first Congress in 1789, right up to the current delegation today.
It's just a remarkable piece of documentation. And while it might masquerade as this dry administrative record, tracking these dates, the names, the footnotes.
The footnotes are wild.
They really are. It reveals a deeply human ledger.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a chronicle of political evolution, fierce ambition, sudden tragedies, and really the fundamental mechanics of how power is transferred in this country.
Okay, let's unpack this. But before we jump into the timeline, I think we need to establish the ground rules for our deep dive today.
Definitely. A crucial disclaimer here.
Right, because this is a history of politicians, which means we are inevitably going to be talking about political parties.
You can't avoid it.
You can't.
Yeah.
The source text mentions Democrats, Republicans, Conservatives, Whigs, and a slew of other factions that, frankly, don't even exist anymore.
Oh, completely gone.
So we want to explicitly remind you of our golden rule for this show. We are absolutely not taking any sides here.
None at all.
We are simply acting as your impartial guides to the historical data provided in this text.
Exactly. We are analyzing the mechanics of the system and the historical trajectory, completely neutral.
Just following the data.
Right. And we'll be tracing this timeline chronologically, starting with the surprisingly chaotic early days of the Senate.
Very chaotic.
Then watching the bizarre evolution of political party labels, examining the intense vulnerabilities and deadlocks that left the office completely vacant.
Which is fascinating.
It really is. And finally arriving at the highly structured modern-day delegation we see now.
Let's start right at the beginning, 1789.
Let's do it.
Because the very first thing that jumps off the page when you look at this early era is a shocking turnover rate.
It's jarring.
It really is. When we think of U.S. senators today, we usually think of individuals who spend decades in Washington, right?
Yeah, building influence, seniority.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But from 1789 through the mid-1800s, this delegation was essentially a revolving door.
A revolving door is the perfect way to describe it.
The sheer volume of the word resigned in the electoral history column is just staggering.
It paints a picture of a vastly different political landscape.
Right.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals something fundamental about how early American government was viewed.
How so?
Well, today, a seat in the U.S. Senate is widely considered the pinnacle of a political career.
Sure.
But this pattern of departures shows that in the early republic, the Senate was frequently treated as a mere stepping stone.
See, I'd actually push back on the idea that they saw it as just a stepping stone to something higher.
Okay, why is that?
When you look at the specific jobs they were leaving the Senate to take, it almost feels like the Senate was viewed as a lesser, almost temporary gig.
Interesting. Give me an example from the text.
Okay, I'm looking at John Sloss Hobart.
Right, elected in early 1798.
Exactly. He serves for literally a few months and then resigns.
To do what?
To become a federal judge.
Okay, a lifetime appointment. That makes some sense.
Sure, but then you have Rufus King. He's elected in 1789, re-elected, and then he just resigns to become the U.S. Minister to Great Britain.
Oh, right.
And John Armstrong Jr. does the exact same thing a few years later to become the U.S. Minister to France.
Right, but those diplomatic posts were incredibly vital at the time.
You think so?
Absolutely. Arguably more critical to the survival of the young nation than casting a vote in a developing legislative body.
That's a fair point. But your point about it being a lesser gig becomes even more apparent when you look at the domestic appointments in the data.
Oh, you're talking about the port.
Yes. That's the one that really caught my eye. James Watson.
Right.
He gets elected to the Senate in August of 1798.
Okay.
By March of 1800, he resigns. And his reason?
It's right there in the footnotes.
He leaves to become the naval officer of the Port of New York.
It sounds crazy today.
It does. You are leaving the United States Senate to go manage a port. Why would anyone make that trade today?
Well, they wouldn't. But in 1800, managing the Port of New York meant you were sitting at the absolute epicenter of American commerce.
In the federal revenue, I assume.
Exactly. Tariffs and customs were the lifeblood of the early economy.
Wow.
So that position likely offered far more immediate, tangible power and perhaps personal financial stability than sitting in a nascent federal legislature.
That was still trying to figure out its own procedural rules.
Right. And a swampy, half-built capital city. It really highlights a time when federal legislative power was highly decentralized.
And the real influence was often kept at the local ports and state capitals.
Yes.
That state-level gravity is incredibly obvious when you look at the gubernatorial data in the table.
The governors.
Yeah, Martin Van Buren,
Right.
William L. Marcy, Silas Wright Jr.
Yeah, the data shows all of them resigned their U.S. Senate seats to become the governor of New York.
They willingly gave up a federal position to go run their home state.
Which tells us that executive power at the state level was simply viewed as more significant.
Or at least more immediately impactful on the daily lives of citizens.
Exactly. You had to give up your Senate seat to go be governor, and they gladly made that trade.
Because the federal government was a remote concept for many.
Right. The state was where the real action was.
So if the job itself was considered that fluid, it makes sense that the political factions trying to control it were just as unstable.
Oh, absolutely.
The data shows that the early party labels were completely chaotic.
Highly experimental.
Look at the first two senators, Philip Schuyler and Aaron Burr.
Right.
They aren't listed as Republicans or Democrats. They are listed as pre-administration and anti-administration.
It's a purely binary system.
Right.
You were defined entirely by whether you supported the current executive government or opposed it.
There wasn't even a pretense of a sprawling multi-issue party platform yet.
No, it was just, are you with the president or against him?
And as you scroll down the decades in this table, you watch the terminology morph in real time.
You see the Federalist label emerge.
Right, then Democratic Republican.
Yeah.
By the late 1820s and 1830s, the data introduces the Jacksonian label.
Yes, for senators like Charles E. Dudley and Nathaniel P. Talmadge.
They literally branded their political affiliation after a single prominent figure, Andrew Jackson.
It feels less like a modern political party and more like a massive personality cult acting as a governing coalition.
It perfectly illustrates the experimental nature of American political identity during that era. They were constantly recalibrating how to group themselves structurally to maintain power.
Definitely.
But here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Okay.
It's one thing for party platforms to evolve over generations. It's another thing entirely for a sitting senator to change parties right in the middle of their career.
Oh, the party switchers.
Yes. The footnotes in this table expose some serious midstream political maneuvering.
Give the listener an example.
Take William H. Seward, for example. He is reelected in 1855 as a member of the Whig Party.
Right.
But a footnote casually mentions he became a Republican shortly thereafter.
Just swap.
He just swapped his entire political identity while holding the seat.
That kind of fluidity points to a broader trend. When a major political coalition like the Whigs begins to collapse, the politicians don't necessarily leave with it.
Right.
They simply rebrand to survive in the new ecosystem.
Revive and advance.
Exactly. And we shouldn't assume that kind of volatility was confined to the 19th century.
Oh, definitely not. Look at James L. Buckley's run in the 1970s.
That is a wild timeline.
It is. He is elected in 1970 as a member of the Conservative Party.
Okay.
6 years later, the text notes he changes parties to become a Republican.
Right.
And then he ultimately loses his re-election bid running under the Liberal Party banner.
So conservative to Republican to liberal.
All within a single decade.
It's a staggering individual trajectory.
It really is.
But it reflects the deeply fractured, complex political machine of New York. A politician like Buckley was navigating shifting alliances, trying to find the exact right lever to pull to stay in office.
Speaking of levers of power,
Yeah.
I want to draw your attention back to the 1800s, to a highly specific footnote regarding Edwin D. Morgan in 1875.
Oh, the caucus vote breakdown.
Yes. This might be my favorite data point in the entire document.
It is incredibly revealing.
Walk us through it.
So the source material cites a Rochester newspaper from January 1875.
Right.
And it details the exact breakdown of the Republican caucus vote to nominate their candidate for the Senate. The tally reads, Morgan 40, Dix 13, Wheeler 2, Fenton 2, blank 5.
The 5 blank votes.
Yes.
That is such a cinematic detail.
Think about what that represents in the context of the era. Before the 17th Amendment established the popular election of senators, these seats were chosen by state legislature.
Right, the voters weren't directly picking these senators.
Exactly. So this footnote captures the intense backroom brokering process of that system.
40 votes for Morgan, 13 for Dix, a handful for others.
But those 5 blank votes are the most fascinating part of the data.
Why cast a blank ballot in a room where everyone is openly tallying influence?
It's pure leverage.
Really?
Oh, yeah. A blank ballot in a smoke-filled room is a profound political statement.
Like what?
It might represent holdouts waiting for a specific patronage promise.
Oh, holding out for a better deal.
Right. It might be cowardice politicians unwilling to publicly alienate a powerful faction by committing to a name.
That makes sense.
Or it could be a deliberate stall tactic to force a brokered convention. What this tiny footnote exposes is that early senators weren't accountable to millions of voters.
They were accountable to a few dozen men in a room holding blank pieces of paper,
Exactly.
which completely explains the high turnover rate we talked about earlier.
How so?
If your entire job depends on keeping a fragile coalition of 60 local politicians happy, the moment that coalition fractures, you're out.
Yeah, you lose the backing.
And the data shows us exactly what happens when those backroom deals completely break down.
The system stalls entirely.
Right. You look at the columns for the early 1800s and you start seeing this chilling phrase.
Legislature failed to elect.
Yes, it happens in 1813. It happens again in 1825.
What's fascinating here is the sheer duration of the consequences.
Right, look at 1819.
In 1819, the table shows a vacancy stretching from March 4th all the way to January 25th of 1820.
That is nearly a full year, where one of New York's 2 seats in the United States Senate was simply left empty.
Just completely vacant because the state legislature couldn't cut a deal.
It's mind-boggling today.
It highlights a massive democratic deficit in the early republic's design. The system was incredibly fragile.
Right.
If the state-level politicians deadlocked, if those guys with the blank ballots refused to cave, the state simply lost half of its representation in the upper chamber of the federal government.
The mechanics of democracy didn't just bend, they broke.
They absolutely broke.
And political gridlock wasn't the only thing leaving these seats empty.
No, not at all.
As we move into the 20th century, the document chronicles some profound human tragedies that threw the entire delegation into chaos.
Yeah, the mid-century transitions.
The timeline from 1949 is almost difficult to track because of how fast the seat changes hands.
The transition of power during that specific window was incredibly turbulent.
I'm looking at the data for Robert F. Wagner.
Okay.
He serves for over 2 decades, starting in 1927.
A long, stable run.
Right. But in June of 1949, he resigns due to ill health, and the table indicates he passes away shortly after.
Creating a sudden vacancy.
Suddenly, you have a massive power vacuum. To fill it, John Foster Dulles is appointed in July of 1949.
Okay.
But Dulles only holds the seat for a few months before facing a special election to finish the term.
Which he loses.
He loses that election to Herbert H. Lehman, who takes the seat in November 1949. What exactly is happening to the political stability here?
Well, think about it. In a span of just 5 months, from June to November 1949, a single, highly influential Senate seat was occupied by 3 completely different individuals.
Wagner, then Dulles, then Lehman.
Right. And consider the broader historical context of 1949. The world is navigating the immediate aftermath of World War II. The Cold War is freezing into place. Global stakes are unimaginably high.
And one of the most important legislative seats in the country is playing musical chairs.
Exactly.
You see a similar, deeply tragic upheaval in the 1960s.
The Kennedy seat.
Yes. Robert F. Kennedy is elected in 1964. But his term ends abruptly on June 6, 1968, marked by the single word in the electoral history column, died.
Following his assassination, the seat is marked vacant for 3 months, a silent gap in the data representing a national trauma.
It's heavy to see it just listed as a data point.
It is. In September 1968, Charles Goodell is appointed to finish Kennedy's term.
Right.
But Goodell eventually loses the election for a full term to James Buckley.
The same Buckley, who would later run under 3 different party labels.
The very same.
Put yourself in the shoes of a New York voter during those periods.
Right. For you, the learner listening to this, imagine that context.
The person you elected is suddenly gone. The governor appoints a replacement you had no immediate say in. Then, months later, there's a special election, and someone entirely new takes the seat.
It must have felt incredibly disenfranchising, even if the system was functioning exactly as designed for a crisis.
It's the ultimate whiplash.
It really reminds us that no matter how structured a political system appears on paper, it is always vulnerable to sudden, uncontrollable human events.
Yeah.
A single tragedy rewrites the entire ledger, forcing millions of people to adapt to a reality they didn't vote for.
But as we keep scrolling down this massive table, moving past the turbulence of the 60s and 70s, the visual rhythm of the document fundamentally changes.
It really smooths out.
We enter the 1980s, and the chaos seems to evaporate.
Completely.
The revolving doors slam shut, and we enter an era of intense stability.
The contrast with the 1700s couldn't be sharper.
Right.
We transition from politicians resigning after 6 months to run a port to individuals who treat the Senate as their ultimate career destination.
Holding these seats for decades.
Decades, yeah.
The data for Daniel Patrick Moynihan shows him serving from 1977 all the way to 2001.
24 years.
Al D'Amato serves from 1981 to 1999.
Decades of continuous service. It's a completely different era of Senate mechanics.
The power has clearly shifted from the state level back to the federal level.
And this modern stability brings us to the mechanical structure of the current Senate.
The classes.
Right. The table divides the senators into classes. Specifically, New York holds a Class 1 seat and a Class 3 seat.
Let's focus on the strategic impact of that.
Sure.
We know the Senate is divided into 3 classes, so that only about a third of the chamber is up for election every 2 years.
Right, to prevent total turnover.
But what does it actually mean for a state to hold Class 1 and Class 3?
It dictates the entire rhythm of the state's political infrastructure.
How so?
Because New York holds Class 1 and Class 3 seats, their delegation was effectively split during the 2022 and 2024 cycles.
Ah.
This means this single state's political machine has to gear up for massive, multi-million-dollar Senate campaigns almost back-to-back.
Let's trace the current delegation data. The Class 3 seat was recently contested in 2022.
Right.
That seat is held by Chuck Schumer, and according to the text, his next election is set for 2028.
Chuck Schumer's data profile is really the epitome of the modern era's stability.
Definitely. He was elected in 1998, serving continuously since 1999.
Furthermore, the text specifically notes he has been serving as the Senate Democratic leader since 2017.
He is an institutional fixture in a way that would have been unimaginable to the politicians of the 1790s.
They wouldn't even comprehend it.
And then there's the Class 1 seat, recently contested in 2024, with its next election in 2030.
The Gillibrand seat.
Right, currently held by Kirsten Gillibrand. But the path to Gillibrand, sitting in that seat today, is its own fascinating chain of events.
It is.
Triggered by a very high-profile resignation that echoes the sudden changes of the past, but handles them with modern precision.
The Hillary Clinton ripple effect.
Yes. If you look at the bottom of the table, Hillary Clinton is elected to the Senate in 2000.
Okay.
She's reelected in 2006, but she doesn't finish that second term.
Right. In January 2009, she resigns to become U.S. Secretary of State.
This creates a sudden vacancy, much like the ones we saw in the early 1800s when politicians left for diplomatic posts.
Right, like Rufus King going to Great Britain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But notice how differently the modern system absorbs the shock.
Oh, it's night and day.
There is no year-long deadlock. There is a brief vacancy of just 5 days. From January 21 to January 26, 2009,
5 days.
Kirsten Gillibrand is swiftly appointed to continue Clinton's term. Gillibrand then wins a special election in 2010 to finish out that term, and the data shows her winning re-election ever since, holding the seat to this day.
One high-level executive appointment ripples out, creates a 5-day gap, and ultimately installs a new senator who ends up holding the position for over a decade.
It is the butterfly effect, perfectly captured in the columns of a Wikipedia table.
It's incredible.
So what does this all mean?
That's the big question.
When we zoom out from all these dates, the shifting party labels, the backroom caucuses, and the modern campaigns, what is the big takeaway for you, our listener?
If we synthesize everything we've analyzed today, it is clear that the single document tracing names from Philip Schuyler in 1789 down to Chuck Schumer today acts as a perfect mirror for the nation's broader structural shifts. We began by looking at a decentralized, weak federal system where the Senate was a temporary gig for men who would rather govern a state or manage a local port.
We watched the chaotic, experimental birth of new political identities.
We saw the absolute vulnerabilities of a system prone to legislative deadlocks and tragic, sudden changes.
And we observed how pre-popular election mechanics meant a few men with blank ballots could stall the democratic process entirely.
Exactly. And finally, we saw the evolution into the highly structured, long-tenured powerhouse delegation that defines the modern era.
The history of the country's centralization of power is quite literally written in the turnover rates of these two seats.
It's amazing how much profound human drama and systemic evolution is hidden in plain sight inside a data table.
It truly is.
But before we go, this analysis raises an important question.
Yeah.
Something we haven't touched on yet, but that the text directly provokes.
Let's hear it.
We spent a lot of time analyzing those early 19th century entries where the data simply says, legislature failed to elect, leaving major Senate seats entirely vacant for months, sometimes nearly a year, due to procedural gridlock.
Right. Those massive gaps in representation that disenfranchise the entire state.
Precisely. So we leave you with this to ponder.
Okay.
In today's era of intense, hyperpolarized political gridlock, could we ever see a return to those early days?
Wow.
The modern system feels stable now, but if certain procedural fail-safes were to break down, say, a governor and a state legislature completely deadlocking over appointment rules during a contested cycle, could we once again see a scenario where a state's major Senate seat sits completely empty for an extended period, just as it did in 1819?
That is a chilling thought to end on, but a fascinating one to explore.
Definitely something to think about.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through the ledger of history. We love doing this for you, the learner. Please keep bringing us these incredible forces, and we will see you on the next deep dive.
Thank you for listening. Keep exploring.